Okay, awesome. Well, we are now live, so thank you all very much for joining us for the latest edition of Hit the Mark with Mark. This month's topic is really around mental health. And joining me today for this, we have two folks that have done quite a bit of work in and around this area, particularly in the university setting. First and foremost is Kristen Cardis, who's the Assistant Director of Sorority and Fraternity Life at Ohio University, the Ohio University, I got that right?
That's correct,
She's also a member of Tri Delt Sorority. So welcome, Kristen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Andrea Kleekamp, who is the Director of Health and Wellness here at Phi Kappa Psi. She's also a sorority woman, being a member, not past tense, once a member, always a member, so being a member of Kappa Alpha Theta. So Andrea, welcome for joining us again.
Yep, happy to join.
So today's topic is really around mental health, and as I sit here and reflect on this, I was trying to prepare for this conversation. I just think, not just the last 5 years, but going back to when I was in school, both grade school as well as university, how mental health was looked upon, 30, 40 years ago. I'm a little older than you ladies. But, I still remember people that had challenges, being referred to as retarded and being demeaned in all sorts of ways. And I think now about how far we've come from those days, which is enormous. That said, we also still have a long way to go in our journey in terms of recognizing it, treating people with respect, and helping folks get the assistance and live the full lives that most folks, even with mental challenges, have the ability to lead. And I think the other thing I was reflecting upon is how the definition of mental health has also shifted, right? Again, if I go back 30, 40 years ago, it usually meant somebody that had a very severe mental deficiency. Whereas today it's taken on, I believe, and I'd love to hear your guys' views on this as we get into it, a much broader sense of just mental well-being, even if there is no physiological or psychological challenge. It's just how do you have good well-being in the chaos that has become life, in the era of the internet and mobile and everything else. And so all the other things that are going on. And so hopefully over the next few minutes, I would love to have a little dialogue and certainly get more input from the two of you who are far more versed on this than I am. And so maybe let me just start out, Kristen, just posing a fairly open-ended question to yourself is, why is mental health even important, and what does good mental health mean in today's environment?
Well, that is definitely a big question. I think mental health is important just because when you're looking at health, you need to look at it from a holistic sense. And so when most people think of health, they're thinking of just physical wellness, but it's very important to be mentally well in addition. I just see it as a key to success, and as well as for students, it doesn't matter. You just need it to be healthy. I think to me, it means checking in with yourself at those, because it's pretty easy when you're physically not feeling well. And sometimes you can ignore it depending on your symptoms. But when you're not mentally well, it really does affect you in so many different aspects and areas of your life. But it's easy to try and think that that's something you can ignore.
Yeah, and I would say too, what I often say is everyone has mental health. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about, Mark, a bit with the shift. We all have it, just as we all have physical health, and it's something you have to maintain. So you have to learn how you interpret the world, how you emotionally react. And sometimes you have to relearn that, just as if you were training for a 5K or a marathon, that there's a process. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to grasp, that your brain can sometimes be your worst enemy, but you also are your best expert and advocate. So just as Kristen said, you've got to really maintain that knowledge of how you're interpreting the world, and when it's maybe not the best way, and that you might need to seek out help or identify some different strategies.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great way you guys have differentiated that, particularly, as I mentioned, from what I remember 30, 40 years ago to a more modern and all-encompassing definition, which I think is healthy way to look at that. Andrea, you've been working in this area for some time now. How have you seen just the view of mental health change over, I don't know, last 5, 10, 20 years, whatever time period you want to put on it? But I'm curious, what's been your experience and how have you seen that change?
Yeah, I think ongoing, there remains this stigma, but people are also willing to talk about it and say, you're not alone. Me too. I've been through that, but that also is a big risk and a leap. I think with social media, it's created both problems and solutions. So problems in that oftentimes the lives we see people living on the internet are very filtered. So they're like, all these awesome things are happening to them and I feel terrible. Something's wrong. That's not the case. People live filtered lives. On the same token, I think it allows people to connect differently and find people and spaces and places where they can talk more candidly. So I think those things, and I think I'm seeing increased resources being put to conversations in fraternity spaces and other spaces, because it's something people are going through. We just haven't had the language and the courage and the willingness to talk about it. But I think once those conversations open up, people are like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's okay for you to get help. I don't know why you wouldn't, but that requires a tremendous amount of courage and bravery, which is why it's important that we have even just simple conversations like this to say that it's important and it matters.
Kristen, how about from your perspective, how have you seen just the whole concept and how the approach to mental health in general or specifically on campuses change over the last, not even just 5, 10 years?
I just think that there are more resources available. There's more focus being put on this area at a college or university setting. And students are just so much more aware of those resources. I even reflect back on my undergraduate experience, and I had no idea that there was a counseling center on campus, and that was a resource that I had. But now it's just something that the students that I work with, they know it's there. They know when the drop-in hours are. They know the phone number to call because it's programmed in their cell phone from orientation. They're just so much more aware of the resources that are available. But to echo some of the initial points, there is still a stigma with it. So even though they know it exists, it's sort of one of the things of, oh, well, I don't need that. That's for somebody else. And so I think it is important to really say it is okay. And there's so many different barriers to seeking those services, but they are there and they are available. Something that's new on our campus, we started a suicide prevention gatekeeper training. And so I'm a core trainer for that, which is really great. And so we're working on getting everyone trained in that to not only be aware of the resources, but that when you do have to have that difficult question and ask someone, are you thinking about suicide, that you're able to handle the answer if they say yes, and able to get them connected to the right places. And so I think that's been really great.
So that's an interesting perspective on things. Again, I kind of come from what I somewhat think about as the Neolithic era of mental health. I mean, I still remember some just horrible things. What do you think has been the biggest shift, right? Because again, we had a counseling center on campus where I went to school, but again, 35 years ago, only crazy people went there, or only the people that were really, on the cusp of suicide went there. And yes, it's important for people who are feeling like they may want to do harm to themselves to see a counselor, but gosh, if it's gotten to that point, you've already, in my view, kind of missed probably so many opportunities to help. What are you seeing, particularly from the program you just mentioned there? That actually sounds quite interesting, to start to try to get some of those interventions earlier before I'm walking in going, help me, I'm done with life, right? There's so many things along that path before I got to that point that you could help somebody out to take them off that path. What are some of the things you're seeing along those lines to help folks before they get to a dire strait, for example?
Yeah, so take myself off mute there. I think the program that I mentioned is definitely for students in crisis. And it is a huge skill to develop, particularly when you're talking about a peer-to-peer relationship for another student to be able to help someone that's in crisis. More often than not, it's those peer-to-peer relationships where things are getting reported. And so we want to make sure that other students have the skills to be able to handle that situation, because it can be kind of scary. I think just, yeah, I'll go back to some of the awareness. We talked about social media, and that's so easy to talk about the media, but you can instantly have that news. Instantly someone becomes a story, or there's a case and you hear all about it. And so I think it's helped to normalize some of seeking this behavior when you're getting to address it before it's in crisis, that you know how to have some of those conversations. And it's important to have conversations like this to really just normalize that mental health is important.
Yeah. And I would say too, I say, like, there's great power in just asking someone if they're okay. No one is going to stop being your friend or your brother if you just check in and are like, hey man, are you okay? No, really, are you okay? Here's the things I've noticed that are not going well. I think you need to seek help. Okay to say to a friend. And if you're really that friend or that brother, it's worth that risk for them to say, no, I'm fine, or I can't believe you would ask me that. Generally, those people oftentimes are really wanting someone to ask the question because they would like to share that. And so that gives them, I think, that permission. And it's never too early to ask that question because particularly, I would say in the fraternity space, you spend so much time together. So you see these things and you notice those changes. And so it's getting out and really calling the attention. And that's, I think, a big part of brotherhood, and where I really see brotherhood and mental health really going hand in hand.
Well, that's a great segue to where I was going to go next, Andrea. So I'll just let you keep going on that. But, and let's just kind of call out another elephant in the room, that historically, I know this is a very broad brush, so I'm sure somebody will object, but historically, women have been much better at having these types of conversations than men have. Men have this tendency to just kind of suck it up, be big, be men, right, and not talk about it. What part do you see fraternities playing in helping men acknowledge or overcome some of the mental health issues they may face in university, which is it's a big change in life and it's a stressful setting. So talk about that, or maybe a little bit more in terms of what role fraternities can play.
I think introducing these conversations back into the space. So the training that Kristen was mentioning, that's a great training to bring into your fraternity with people. That creates norms where mental health is just something that you talk about. I think there are naturally stressful times of year in the college calendar. That's times to, are there stress management things happening on campus? I know there's campuses like around finals, they bring puppies on campus. Go as fraternity brothers to that event. So just making it something that you do, even if it's, it can be simple things like your scholarship chair mentioning, here's where you can get help, your risk manager, those people. So just really integrating it into what you're already doing. And then, like I said, a lot of it's that informal conversation and just check-ins beyond just like your news feed. Like, I saw what they posted on Twitter, they're good. Like actually like going down the hall and making sure someone's okay, inviting them along. You haven't seen someone in a while. That's an important thing. I'd also put in a plug that beyond just college, as alumni, that's really important. And I think that's a continuance too, that I think sometimes you go out into the world, because mental health doesn't stop in that environment, but those are the places where I see it really playing a big role.
Yep, no, I think that makes sense. And just having that personal touch is so important, particularly in the modern era of social media. It is so easy to think, hey, I whipped down an email, they emailed me back, texted me, they just Facebooked, so they're good. not realizing that pretty much all of us, our real life is not what is portrayed in social media, to some to more extent than others, but having that personal touch and not losing that makes total sense. Kristen, what do you, from your perspective and your vantage point, as sorority and fraternity life at a major university in the United States? I mean, you get to see a lot of this across the board, not just with Phi Kappa Psi, but across the board, both with the men's organizations and the women's. What do you see as the Greek organization's role, and what's been maybe successful in helping members get through some of the challenges on university campuses these days?
I think at our core, fraternities and sororities, we always say we're values-based organizations, we're lifetime membership organizations, but I have seen organizations that really do follow that and believe in that. And it comes down to that support structure, that these are the people, like you said, that you see them every day, when they're having a good day, when they're having a bad day. And so those are the people you're most likely to be vulnerable with and be able to say, hey, are you okay? But really, are you okay? And so to echo some of what you said earlier, but I just see that structure built in place is so useful and helpful and really necessary when you're trying to navigate, especially a larger university, and find your place. Having those friendships and really those deep connections with other people are so important.
Yep, I think that totally makes sense, and I certainly relate to that, thinking back to my time on a major university at Virginia Tech. So as we start to think about wrapping this up, Kristen, maybe kind of just on a personal note, like one tip or trick that you use to stay mentally healthy. We've talked a lot about some of the extreme cases, but just kind of like what Andrea was saying earlier, mental health is like physical health. You got to kind of exercise a little bit every day. And so what's one or two little things that you do just in daily life to kind of keep yourself mentally healthy?
So a pretty simple one that I can think about, I see my mental health as trying to balance my work and my life, which is a work in progress, to say the least, for everybody. But one simple thing is I don't have work email on my phone. I know that sounds so strange. One is work doesn't pay for my phone, so I'm willing to negotiate that with them if they're interested in paying for it. But for right now, that's my one thing, that it's not there constantly looming over me, so that when I'm home, I'm home. Yes, my students have my cell phone number, so they're probably going to text me if they really need something. But just trying to have some of those balances, and that keeping those spheres of, home is home, work is work. It's again, progress slowly, but that's one thing that I do to try and balance everything.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, I mean, translated from a student perspective, it's a little bit of, you've got that disconnect time. So don't just live on social media, disconnect from work, disconnect from email, go do something, human, face-to-face, human interaction that has nothing to do with that, to kind of unwind. So that makes sense. Andrea, what's a tip or trick from you to stay mentally healthy?
Yeah, I love reading. I read a lot. So that's like one of my pieces. With that though, I track what I read, because what I found is when I'm not reading, my stress levels aren't in a place that's a good place. So I can actually look in my planner and see, you know what, last week I didn't read anything, which says to me that I need to evaluate. And it's actually really, it's a odd correlation, but it's been a really helpful correlation to me, because I know that's what I need, because that's my, I can shut out the rest of the world time, but adding that then additional tracking piece, one, lets me see what I've read throughout the year, because I like recommending books to people, but two, it allows me to actually have a record of when things aren't aligned, and then I can look and look at the rest of my life and see what I need to shift to be at a better place.
Now that's great. I mean, that really, I think, encapsulates a number of the things we just talked about, right? Awareness of self in terms of what you need to keep yourself mentally healthy, awareness of others, your friends, your sisters, your brothers, making sure that you check in periodically so there's an active state. It's not just kind of let it go. And if I don't hear anything, they're good. No, actually be more proactive, check in, make sure if there's even a question. And so there's this balance, I think, between awareness and actively working through that. And just, again, I don't know, a lot of it comes down, I think, Kristen, to what you were saying, is just maintain that human touch. It's that human factor that at the end of the day really comes down to it. So that's awesome. Andrea, any parting thoughts or words as we wrap up this session?
I'd put in a plug just on the FISI end, because that's what I do, that we will have, we're building out some really exciting chapter-based resources that will be available in the fall for chapters who are wanting to take on these conversations more through our Elevate the Conversation program. And then chapters can always connect with me if they're interested in doing more. And also there's some fantastic resources, people like Kristen on campuses that chapters can also use to figure out where those resources are on their campus if they're not yet aware of what those might be.
Wonderful, thank you. Kristen, any parting thoughts, words of wisdom?
I just think it's so great that FISI is having this conversation. This is something so important, and I'm happy to be a part of it and happy to represent my fellow Bobcats.
Awesome. Well, thank you both ladies for participating today. I think it's been great. We will get this posted, and hopefully some of our young men will find value in some of our key takeaways. So thank you all very much for joining us.